it is not the best use of their cash to park it in real estate, because if you're an operator, you can make much more money operating your business and expanding through acquisition or through organic growth, right? Not that many people want to buy low to middle market single tenant buildings. Why is that true? Because they're more complicated.
Mhm.
There's more structuring involved. Sometimes I would get balance sheets that don't balance.
Can you just talk to us a little bit more about your family immigrating to the United States? Just some of the struggles that you faced early on in your life.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I guess at a high level, I came to the U.S. when I was 11. It was, me, my brother, my older brother, and my parents. And it wasn't the easiest path. Essentially, my parents had their degrees not make it to the U.S., um, which is a very Russian thing where they take things. um, uh, essentially on purpose, so that
What were their degrees in?
engineering. And so we essentially arrived in Tucson, Arizona, without any uh, means of making an income. And of course, when you call them, the feedback is kind of like, "Well, you pay us $1 million, and we'll send you a copy," right? So ultimately, it took years for them to get it, and in the meantime, we started a Lego club nonprofit in Tucson, Arizona, that actually took off quite a bit. We got like a few grants, and my brother and I was 11, my brother was 13, so we were able to help quite a bit. Um, and and look, and then I started working, when I was 13. My brother probably right around 13 as well. And
What year would this have been when you guys
this
when you
was
guys came
2001.
here?
2001.
2001. Okay.
Yeah. Um, Yeah, so it was a tough upbringing, but my parents were wonderful, and you just I guess what's the song? You started from the bottom, now you're here.
Yeah. So tell me more about your parents. They started this club. What did they continue with that? Did they start to do other entrepreneurial things? Like what was their, you know, progression? Like how did they
Yeah,
support you guys?
I mean, to be candid, it was tough. Thankfully,
Yeah.
we moved to Tucson, and not like a place like New York, where cost of living was pretty cheap. But they ran the nonprofit that at some point they went back to college and got different like student grants for working part-time. But I think they really struggled, and it was very difficult. um but I think more than anything, it taught my brother and I like a big lesson in like perseverance, and just even picking up everything. One thing that I'll mention quickly, like we essentially got a letter after 8 years of waiting. It essentially said you have a month to leave or something like that. But it was a very short term,
Like
and
an
if you don't
eviction?
leave, I mean, yeah, you can think of it that
That's
way.
just
Russia was evicting us, yeah.
yeah.
Um, and at the end of the day, of course, we're like, well, shoot, like we only have a short time. Of course, I was a little kid, so I wasn't very helpful, probably.
Oh,
Um,
this was actually in Russia.
yeah, yeah. We essentially we waited for this document. I think they applied when I was born, right around there, and then we left right around when I was 11.
Mhm.
Um, so it took 10-ish years, give or take. And when we got sort of a notice saying we can leave the country, it was within a few weeks that we had to leave.
Wow.
So it was a very frantic like move, and my parents did it. I don't know how, to be honest. Like I have three kids now, and
Yeah.
it's just hard. Like it's hard to pick up and move. And if you sort of think about their life, I think similar to most refugee parents, the they sort of live a life in a sense for their kids.
Mhm.
Um, and that was very meaningful. I think about it every day.
Yeah, that's awesome. Are they still living? Are they near you, or what's the situation with the
Yeah,
your
yeah.
mom and
So
dad?
my mom lives in Tucson.
Mhm.
My dad passed away like around 12 years ago. Well, just very quickly, about like 10 days cancer.
Oh, wow.
But yeah, again, I learned a lot from that, and life isn't easy sometimes.
No, no, definitely it's not. I wanted to hear a little bit about, like, when you guys first got here, did you have how was your English? What was it like starting school for you? Talk to me a little bit, like, as you got into high school, getting into college, like, what was that like?
I mean, it was rough. Like, we didn't know English, none of us.
Yeah.
Um, we probably knew a total of, let's say, like 100 words.
Mhm.
Um, School was rough. Like, me and my brother got made fun of all the time.
Yeah.
I remember coming to school for Halloween the first time, and I was so confused. Like, what are all these people doing? Because obviously, we don't celebrate that in Russia. So, there's just a lot of like cultural aspects that are very different. Um, and but again, I think the beauty of something like this is when you have no choice. Like, I literally couldn't speak to my teachers. I couldn't make friends. It
Yeah.
was painful, and I'm sure I cried.
Sure.
I don't know, probably pretty common
Yeah.
occurrence, and but looking back at it, um, when you don't have a choice, you learn something pretty quickly. So my brother and I picked up a decent amount of English within a year. My parents, of course, took longer, but so sometimes the best way to learn something is just not to give yourself a choice.
Yeah. Was there a Russian community then when you guys moved to Arizona, or were you pretty much on your own in terms of community?
There was like a refugee center that supported us. For example, we came and yeah, there was like an apartment that was furnished already for us and some food in the fridge.
Right.
And then there was different levels of support for education, finding jobs, things like that. Um, which was certainly very, very helpful. But you feel like you're on your own. There's not like a big community, and everyone is pretty stressed out on making things work, and a lot of, even if you could get degrees and you translated them, the equivalents are not the same. For instance, my father-in-law was a dentist, back in US, what's it called, former USSR,
Yeah.
and and he came here with that degree, but it wasn't recognized.
Mhm.
And this is like a very common thing. Doctors of all sorts, engineers of all sorts. Like, you essentially have to remake yourself, and it's not in your teens, and it's not in your 20s. Many times, it's
Mhm.
in your 30s. And that's a difficult path on top of raising children, which is
Yeah, I
hard. Which is hard itself.
it's incredibly hard and challenging. I've got a couple Russian friends that same situation. Came to the U.S.
Right?
Their parents were professionals in the USSR. They come here, and it's like you said, it's a completely brand new start. It's fascinating to me. Like, they've all done incredibly well. So I don't. I wanted to hear, like, does it give you a hunger and a drive that maybe like a regular guy, who's just had a regular easy life doesn't have? Would you say that is the case for you? Is there something that drives you, or maybe like a chip on your shoulder? Like, I've talked to some guests and they talk about having a
Yeah.
chip on their shoulder that has
Yeah.
driven them.
Um, there's no doubt. I mean, Patrick, like, I think when you grow up living a very simple life, um, and you're exposed to other people and other ideas, I think initially you have like a very small view of the world,
Mhm.
and your personal possibilities. And then as those possibilities expand and you dream bigger and think bigger, um, you realize what the different possibilities could be, right? And personally, again, we came here uh, quite literally with nothing, not even English.
Mhm.
I didn't have any relationship. My parents didn't know anyone when I was like trying to look for jobs. And on the one hand, that was a very difficult experience. On the other hand, it sort of set me off on a different track in terms of understanding the value of relationships and how I should have, um, let's call it, optimized my undergraduate experience, et cetera, et cetera. Um,
Well,
yeah.
let's get into that. I want to hear about how you chose to go to the University of Arizona. You ended up with 4 majors, which I don't think I've met anyone with 4 majors. Talk to us about why the majors that you studied, why you chose them, and just maybe some of the influences that kind of pushed you early on in terms of what you were thinking in terms of a career. Like what was your mindset at that stage, like what you wanted to pursue?
Yeah. I'll try to I'll try to make it short. So, in terms of what I studied, it was finance, accounting, math, and economics. Um, I actually started in the engineering school. Um, and after sitting through a few weeks of chemistry and physics, I realized I liked it. I just realized that I'm not going to be able to stand out and be sort of, let's call it, in the top 10%. Um, which, by the way, is, I think, a big life lesson in general, meaning, um, I think it's just very important. And I was lucky enough to sort of, so some people say, work on your weaknesses, work on your weaknesses. And I think that is one way of thinking about life. Another is, um, work on your weaknesses by focusing on your strengths, right? And the weaknesses come up anytime, every day, in different ways, right? But you don't want to be in a setting where you're not above average, let's call
Mhm.
it, you know.
Yep.
And I just kind of looked around and I was like, man, like I don't understand things as quickly as other people. This is probably not for me, you know. Um, and so I had a mentor of mine in high school, actually, that I'm still close to. Which again, it kind of goes back to crazy stories, right? Because for some reason I wasn't even in this class, but we connected because I played ping pong,
Oh, nice.
and he had a table in his room, and we hit it off. So at some point, I asked him for advice because his wife was in engineering, and he actually graduated from the University of Arizona with a marketing degree. So he told me, like, look, I wouldn't recommend marketing. Like, you like math and quantitative stuff. So why don't you like go work on Wall Street or something? And I was like, what's that? Like, I didn't know about the stock market.
Yeah.
I was completely clueless. And by the way, I also didn't know that it was 2007, 2008. So that just like tells you how cool it was.
Uh-huh.
Um, And so anyway, so my first major was finance. Then I took my first accounting class and I was like, wow, like I did really well. It comes pretty naturally. The accounting feels pretty important when it comes to investments. Let me double major in accounting.
Mhm.
Um, then in the summer of 2010, hard to believe that it was 13 years ago, but I got accepted to a summer program at Harvard Business School. And I spent some time with the PhD admissions office there. Um, and as part of that, they said, like, listen, you can certainly apply to one of our PhDs, but it's going to be very difficult for you to be competitive without having like a very serious economics and math background. So then I added math and economics. Um, and so essentially the story was I was in school essentially double full time for every summer, winter, every semester, like nonstop. Um, and then close to graduation, I woke up and I was like, "Hey, what's next?" And originally, the plan was to go the doctorate route.
Mhm.
Um, I got into Cambridge.
Yeah.
for like a master's that sort of would fold into a PhD in financial engineering. Um, and then I went to Israel, which is a whole other conversation. But I went to Israel, ended up spending 2 years there instead of going to Cambridge. Um, and as part of that whole experience, learned a lot more about myself. And one thing I learned is like I just don't do well with theory.
Mhm.
Um, Things can't be theoretical; they need to be very practical. Um, and as part of that, I realized I need to go into industry.
Was it an academic program that you were doing in Israel, or was it something else?
So it was. It's called yeshiva. It's
Yeah.
essentially a call it like 12 to 15 hour a day. Um, you can think of it as like sort of college or like
Mhm.
religious college, if you will,
Mhm.
where let's say like 70% of the time you're delving into the Old Testament, the Talmud. I don't know if you've heard of that. Like
Sure, sure.
old scripture in Hebrew and Aramaic. And then about 30% of the time you're spending um, understanding yourself as a person, like
Mhm.
what drives you, how
Yeah.
can you work on your character, and those things are meant to be very complementary to each other.
And so that was 2 years that you were in Israel, is that, did I hear that right?
2 years, yeah, a little bit over 2 years, yeah,
And did
exactly.
you find that useful, like, to have that period of time to, like you said, work on your character, work on maybe deeper questions, deeper issues that I think
Um,
maybe a lot of young people don't think about?
yeah, I think it was probably the most profound 2 years of my life.
Mhm.
I genuinely don't. It's weird. Like sometimes people will ask me, people that are considering going to this fellowship, or people that aren't Jewish, they'll ask me like, why did you do it? And the answer that they expect is, I really got a lot of religious stuff out of it, right?
Mhm.
And that's true. I certainly learned a lot, in terms of scripture and things like that. But for me, a lot more of it was character
Mhm.
based. Like I learned a ton about what type of person I want to be. I have found a lot of role models that I guess, at least in my experience, was very hard to find in the typical corporate world.
Mhm.
And it showed me kind of how I want to live my life and what should I model my life after. Um, and then, I went on an entire like exploratory phase of my life, realizing I'm not as introverted as I thought. In college, I sort of forced myself. I didn't really have a choice with all the double full time coursework. I was in library almost all day.
Sure.
Um, and I just kind of assumed that I'm just like this introverted person that hates speaking to people.
Mhm.
Um, but when I got a chance to breathe in Israel, meet some people, I realized I have like this massive drive to meet people, network, um, and a lot of people there were phenomenal, and they expanded my mind in terms of even thinking about that.
Yeah, it brings to mind your pinned tweet is a rabbi, I believe, right?
Yes,
And,
yes,
I forget exactly what he says, but can you share a little bit about that? Because I think I remember
yeah,
watching it a while ago
yeah,
when
yeah.
I first kind of found out about you, and I know it was
Yeah.
really good. Can you share why that is pinned to you?
Yeah, it's like it's a very short like 2 minute video, and I think it's one of the most meaningful 2 minute videos that I've seen. Essentially, what he talks about is um, that difficult times um, are only difficult to the extent that they help you grow. In other words, if you're not going through a struggle, you as a person can't grow. And then,
Yep.
he uses a lobster as sort of like a metaphor to explain this. But I think I've seen this to be true all the time. For example, at my last job at store, I managed, a $10 billion portfolio through COVID, and I can't tell you how stressful that was. It was like, it was a lot, to say the least. You essentially had 2,500 properties, all in the lower middle market, and these are not public companies flush with cash.
Mhm.
Um, So it was challenging, and we got hundreds of calls for help and people crying and wanting help. And, you sort of had to triage the entire situation. I had a whole team to lead, and we had sell side analysts and buy side analysts and credit agencies calling us like, "What's going on? What are you guys going to do?" So
Right.
it was a lot. But where I'm getting to is that was probably one of the most meaningful career pivots in my life, where I would, you got through that and you're like, man, I just learned a lot. But you don't realize that while you're going through the pain.
Right. Yeah. I want to get back to store here shortly, but I want to
Yeah, sure,
kind of
sure.
circle back to your university days. You had four majors. I think you had what, a 3.95 grade point average, something like
Yes.
super high. Um, but you wrote also on Twitter that a class in cold calling or relationships would have been maybe more useful than those four majors. Is that something that you really believe, or I'm just
Yeah.
kind of like thinking about like looking back on things. Is there anything
or
you would
or
have done?
was I tweeting for engagement?
Yeah, well, maybe, or
No,
just
no, I'm
like
kidding.
being tongue in
I,
cheek.
I, I Patrick absolutely do, and I'll tell you. I mean, I have 3 kids now, and I'm day to day. I'm thinking like, should I send them to college, right?
Yeah, yeah,
And I think the answer, look, if they want to go to medical school
yeah.
or something like that, that very clearly requires a certain path, no problem.
Mhm,
But I think 80% of the careers out there, and I would argue perhaps 50% of the high earnings careers out there don't require college.
mhm, mhm,
Um, and look, I think the best way to describe it, Patrick, is when people ask me, what do you use most out of your education? Um, I surprisingly tell them math,
mhm.
and they ask me why. Like, I don't do calculus,
Right.
I don't do real analysis. Like, those classes were painful, like proving calculus from scratch. Like, that didn't teach me anything as far as investing goes,
Right.
but it taught me how to, hit my head against the wall for 3 days in the library to figure out a proof, and not give up because I know there's an answer,
Mhm,
right? And that was probably the most important thing I learned, right? So now, going back to your ultimate question, meaning why is relationship building and cold calling more important? Because I realized when I left, like, all the people that had relationships got the fancy jobs, and my four majors and 3.95 GPA didn't really matter. At the end of the day,
mhm.
jobs go to people with relationships.
Right.
Um, and I would say even further, I think typically people get jobs to get some sort of financial freedom or financial success. And as soon as you talk about leaving an organization or starting something on your own, it's all about relationships. Uh,
Mhm,
I mean, everyone forgets where you went to school, what GPA you had a year out, 2 years out, and the way to get your first job is not your GPA or where you went to school. It's cold calling people in the area, cold emailing, and again, Patrick, my point more than anything is, this sounds funny, but in college, I didn't even understand that was a thing. Like, you can
networking and
Yeah,
relationships
like,
and cold
what it I
calling.
just I felt like it was like this dirty, like, why would I bother someone with a question that's like taking from them? I don't wanna do that. Like,
Yeah,
I'll get a good job by, locking myself in the library for 5 years nonstop and
yeah,
getting the most majors and getting the highest GPA, and that was just, like, so wrong.
yeah. So looking back on things, like, that's not how you would have done things much differently? Or you
No,
would have.
absolutely not.
No.
Absolutely not. I
Okay.
I I think I could have learned everything that was relevant to what I do now in, I mean, it sounds scary to say, but probably a few months.
Right,
I really don't use that much knowledge from undergrad.
right.
I don't know, probably University of Arizona doesn't want to hear this. um, and universities at large. But um, I think I would have focused a lot more on relationship building, right?
Right.
I just totally didn't understand how the world in the US functions. I think in Russia it's very like it's very academic based,
Hmm.
and it was a little late in the game that I realized in the US like people sort of care about your academics. But I've seen many cases of people with 2.5 GPAs, one major, Goldman Sachs investment banking, and I'm like, what? Like how? That's impossible. And the answer is, um, by the way, sometimes it's like an uncle or whatever.
Hmm.
But put that aside. The answer is sometimes the person was like, hey, let me cold email someone in Goldman. I'm in New York, and they responded, and they got coffee, and the thousands of other resumes that have way better credentials got ignored just because this guy had a personal relationship with the guy with 2.5 GPA.
Right. Right. So is that
But
something
that's
that you've really worked on since leaving college? Is learning how to network, learning how to cold call? Is that something that you've spent a fair amount of time on?
Yeah, a ton.
Yeah.
I mean, I think I actually, I actually have a thread going out on this today, because oftentimes I get asked what, like, I don't have a network. And someone
Hmm.
just texted me yesterday, a friend of mine, and he was like, "Okay, like, fine, I understand networking is important. Like, what do I do?" And I think the first step, more than anything, which I was lacking, is you have to be comfortable with reaching out to people.
Hmm.
Um, and what I typically say is the best way to do that is realizing that regardless of your age or experience, you always have something to add or to help with the other person with,
Hmm.
right? So some of the examples I put in this thread were, for example, you're a college student. I help college students all the time, get placement. And the last thing I'm like, I don't like, I'm talking to the MD of Goldman Sachs. Like, how am I going to find a way to help them, right? Um, one example is you might be at a club and it's like, it's an awesome club at, let's say, NYU, and you have a really good connection to a bunch of interns, right? So you might sort of be an in for this person to find really good intern candidates,
Hmm.
right? You might have a software idea that this guy has never heard of. You might think of a stock idea that you barely like researched, but you just think is interesting, and you'll mention it to him, and he'll be like, "Well, damn, like this little kid clearly doesn't know what he's talking about, but I've never looked into that stock. Let me look into it."
Yeah.
Right? So more broadly, the point is you have to understand that networking is not a taking activity. It should be fundamentally a giving one,
Hmm.
and then you just track that and let it compound over time. And you look back in 10 years, and I mean, just incredible things will happen.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm now thinking about your Sam Altman uh, post about the I think the you said that it was like one of the most important. What was it? An essay that he
Yeah, yeah, it
wrote.
was just a blog post. Yeah.
So I
Um,
just was thinking about that, about like the 1% kind of improving 1%. Like one
yeah,
of the points was that. Can you talk a little bit about why that made such an impact on you, and then also like how you implement it in your own life?
sure. The
His
the one
advice.
percent thing specifically.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So I mean, just to set the stage, I mean, I so humbly said, obviously I don't know Sam, but from what I can gather, his last venture before OpenAI, let's say, was not a complete failure, but not a success either.
Hmm.
Um, and he worked on it for many many years, and I think it was probably pretty challenging to walk away from it without a big success. Then he's been working at OpenAI for several years, and I think in many ways he never got fame until I don't know, he's like 6 months ago, give or
Right.
take. There was a Microsoft deal and Chat GPT, obviously. Um, and the beauty of this blog post, I think, is it was written in 2019. So he probably knew what he was sitting on, but no one else did. Um, and it was just very insightful, right? Because I think there's 13 different topics that he touches on. And one of them is, to your point, sort of apply compounding to yourself, right?
Hmm.
So many times we think about compound interest. Many people don't even know about it, but
Right.
it will blow your mind
Yeah.
if you really think about it. Um, and one way I apply this to my life.
The biggest challenge to taking control of your personal finances, improving your investment returns, and building a better future is just getting started. This means getting organized, having a plan, and being disciplined. As Mark Twain once said, the secret to getting ahead is getting started. To break out of the treadmill of slaving away each week only to have nothing left over, watching the savings you have get eroded away by inflation's vicious bite, or freeing yourself from the corporate grind. It all requires you to master the conversion of time into value. To help you do this, we created a list of 4 simple steps to taking control of your personal finances and life. And you can download it for free by clicking the link in today's description.
Is funny enough, it's Twitter. So like ever since I started with 0 followers, I have a spreadsheet that I update literally every day, and my goal is to get 1% more followers. Now, um, I think about that on as a daily goal and also a cumulative goal to not to not be like overly obsessed with followers,
Hmm.
like and more obsessed with like quality of the content. And what happens is like, look, when you have 100 followers, getting one more is very easy. It's like a very attainable goal.
Yep.
Um, now, like I think around the 8,000 range, and like for example, yesterday I didn't get 80 followers. I think I got like 15.
Hmm.
However, 3 weeks ago, one of my posts went viral, and I think I got 1,000 from that post. Um, and so again, like you kind of were like, okay, like I didn't meet the goal for today, but I'm still over my sort of what the goal was had my post not went viral. So it's like, great, okay, that's a great day, you know. And you just keep it, you keep going, every single day, day in and day out. Consistency is massive, and if you apply consistency with the 1% rule, I think I've personally seen it work with growing a Twitter following, and it's just pretty amazing to look back and think, it just took, let's say, an hour of daily effort, 30 minutes, whatever it is. Um, and then over time, it just compounds, and you look back, and you're like, damn, like I built. It's not a big following, but it's certainly something. Um, and it's all based on this rule. I literally have the spreadsheet every day.
What were some other points from the Sam Altman blog post that also made a big effect on you?
Yeah, I think the two that I pointed out, one big one was that the only way to get like really wealthy is owning something. And his point more than anything was typically careers are fairly linear, whereas owning something is not linear. Um, and I don't know, maybe I think that was cool because I like math, but I think it's very, yeah, Patrick, it's something that I just, coming from Russia, you're just like, get on the career train, stay on it forever, stay at the same employer forever, and that's success, and you just read something like this, and you're like, well, wow, like I never thought about that,
Hmm.
you know. And again, I also think it's amazing hearing it from someone who was not so successful when he wrote it, on
Right.
paper at least, you could say,
Hmm.
um and I'll tell you one more thing related to that is one quote that I really loved is, he talks about how I'm probably going to mess it up, but it was something along the lines of, I don't care how long it takes me to find a new opportunity or a new job, because I know that the goal is once I find that opportunity, the rest of my life, career beforehand, should essentially become like a footnote.
Hmm.
In other words, what I'm about to, the rocket ship that I'm about to jump on is so meaningful. And that's why I'm so patient, because I need to find the right thing. And that one thing, and by the way, I think it's very true in his life, right? Like OpenAI became a massive company,
Hmm.
and everything that he did beforehand is like a footnote on his life
Yeah.
compared to this one thing.
Right.
And
Right.
yeah, so hopefully, happy to continue. But
Yeah, no, no, no. I'll definitely put the blog Sam's that post in the show notes, and so people can read it
yeah,
on their own if they'd like, because it's very good. And I do want to move on to talking about real estate. So you're
sure.
in Israel at Yeshiva, right, for two
Yeah,
years. When did the real estate bug bite you? Like, how did that come about?
yeah. It actually didn't. Like all of my experiences before real estate were investing. I did quantitative investing, like distressed trade claims, not real estate, just a trade claim in a Chapter 11 or Chapter 7 bankruptcy proceeding. Then I did strategy consulting, a little bit of private equity turnaround work, and then I really didn't touch real estate until I moved to Phoenix. Um, and in a funny way, so store, and really any single tenant investor, or I should say most of them, if you're writing a long term lease, that is, let's say, 15 years, um, and you only have one tenant in the building, so the majority of your work in terms of investment thesis is around the credit, because if the tenant leaves and defaults, you have a vacant building on your hands. So because of that, I joined store as a portfolio manager when I came, but I think what I brought wasn't really the real estate knowledge. Funny enough, it's a REIT, but it very much functions like a private equity type of credit place, because so much of the work is credit related, right?
Hmm.
um, and that was a really good fit. So I did a lot of work on the portfolio side, in terms of their um, um, managing the portfolio. I
So
think
when
when I
when you
joined,
got hired when you got hired
yeah,
on at store, what capacity did they bring you in at? Were you an analyst? What were you up to for them
yeah,
initially?
I was. I mean, I guess officially, my first title was portfolio analyst.
Hmm.
Um, and I got brought into the portfolio management group, which I think at the time was roughly 4 billion, give or take. Um, and I worked on a lot of anything that 4 billion that we owned. We needed to understand it and keep track of it. So we already presumably understood it since underwrite, right? But if you bought something a year ago, something could completely change, and the goal was always to have a really good handle on um, the strength of your contract throughout the term of the lease, right? So meaning, just because the business was doing really well at underwrite and they gave you projections that made sense a year from then that were good, that doesn't mean that they've reached them, right? And so we would collect quarterly financials from the sort of consolidated entity and any properties under it that we owned. On a quarterly basis, we would process them. Anything concerning, we ultimately brought back to the owner of the business, or the private equity sponsor, in some cases. And ultimately, of course, if you own the real estate, your only decision is, hold and take on the risk, um, or sell, right? That's really all you can do. Um, but there's quite a bit of analysis that goes into, how is the tenant doing? How does it compare to our expectations before? How does it compare to last quarter? And I guess my larger point, Patrick, was I got, I had a credit bug, like I liked analyzing financials, understanding businesses, and that's what really brought me to store. And then I realized, wow, like real estate is fascinating.
Hmm. So explain. You mentioned single tenant leases. Talk to us
Yeah.
a little bit about, explain that, for some of our listeners who don't understand what a single tenant lease is, some of the challenges of those, what you were looking at. And then I guess just more broadly, what exactly was Store focusing on in terms of their portfolio investments?
Yeah, for sure. So, I guess a few definitions first. So, there's something called a sale leaseback, which is essentially, I mean, imagine, Patrick, you own, I don't know, five child cares, and you own and operate from those locations, meaning you own the real estate and you also operate out of them, i.e., you own the operating company.
Mhm.
Um, at some point, you had to put a mortgage on your properties, and it's probably like 60% loan to value. Um, and the question is always, where does the other 40% come from, right? And more importantly, is it the best use of that 40%?
Mhm.
So to anyone who is sort of trying to grow their business, in most cases, um, it is not the best use of their cash to park it in real estate, because if you're an operator, you can make much more money operating your business and expanding through acquisition or through organic growth, right? Um, but your money is like sort of like stuck in your real estate. You get what I mean?
I do.
Um, so so that's where the sale leaseback transaction sort of began. You essentially called such a person and you say, hey, how about we buy your 40% equity out? You pay down the loan, meaning you sell the building to us, you take the proceeds, pay the loan 60%, 40% you'll keep as cash, minus taxes, obviously. And then you can do whatever you want with the money, right? So in other words, you can take the money, you can invest it into the business, you can buy another business, right? You can, I don't know, invest it into Bitcoin. But that's how the sale leaseback concept started. You sell it, you sell the building, and then you lease it back. In other words, you as a tenant and as the original owner of the building are able to stay in that building. You sign a 15-year lease, right? So it doesn't displace your business, and in the meantime, you're able to capitalize on the 40% equity. Um, so that's what Store did.
Mhm.
We specifically, did single tenant sale leasebacks. In other words, it's kind of, we think of a freestanding building that has one tenant inside, um, and there's the operator. And again, we do the sell lease back, lease it back on like a 15, 20-year term, um, and within that, there's a lot of granularity. This is a sell lease back market. It's a massive market. Billions of billions trade every year, um, and within that we play, there's sort of like the investment grade sell leaseback space, which you can think of doing a sell leaseback to McDonald's, In and Out Burger, Starbucks, whatever, like the investment grade type credits. And then there's the low to mid market, which is sort of like the step below that, which is anything from a three pizza shop mom and pop operation to, let's say, like a KKR backed 50 million EBITDA manufacturing operation,
Mhm.
right? So that's where we played. Um, I think, did I answer everything?
Yeah, so you grew the portfolio. It sounded like it was about 4 billion when you started there, and when you left, it was around 10 billion. So talk to me about
Yeah.
that growth. What was that like trying to manage that process?
Yeah, it was a lot. I can't say I did it by myself, right? I worked for
Sure.
a public REIT, so there's a sales team, an investment team, a portfolio team, and at some point, I actually essentially took the investment team and the portfolio team and merged them under myself, um, as part of like a reorganization. And so the beauty of that was, anytime you look at transactions, so we've been talking about childcare. So let's say childcare. So a childcare transaction comes in, um, I'll assign it to one of my vice presidents that cover childcares. So in other words, they don't only have questions based on what the prospective tenant sent us. they might also have questions based on the, I don't know, call it 400 million of childcares that we own already from the portfolio, and that vice president covers that entire exposure, right? So there was sort of this feedback loop, and once you close on something, that childcare would sort of come back to that person to manage for the rest of the lease term. Do
Mhm.
you get what I mean?
I do.
And in terms of scale, look, I mean, I think the management team did a phenomenal job. Like, I think firstly the business model is very well thought out. Chris Volk started sort of like this idea in many ways, um, and it's just extremely well thought out. There's a massive market for it. Not that many people want to buy. This might be interesting for some of your viewers. You know, not that many people want to buy low to middle market single tenant buildings. Why is that true? Because they're more complicated.
Mhm.
There's more structuring involved. Sometimes I would get balance sheets that don't balance. Um, and the immediate reaction is like, oh my gosh, like, like, what planet do you live on? You don't have balance sheets that balance, right? And then once you see more of them, you realize, you know, um, these people have been operating this business for 20 years, and like it's a business, and like their controller quit a year ago,
Mhm.
and they just made a mistake. Like they're not in the business of financials, you know. And you ask obviously plenty of questions to sort of make sure that uh, everything is really sound, and there's always sort of an art to how you ask those questions, because if you get on a call with a prospective tenant and say, why doesn't your balance sheet balance? you
Right.
know, they might not want to sell their building to you anymore. So there's a way to ask things, right? But yeah, it's a fascinating space, and because of the um, I guess I could say sophistication that's involved on the
Yeah.
origination side, um, the competition is just much less. We
Mhm.
we typically acquired in like the 8 to 9 cap range,
Mhm.
while In and Outs and McDonald's and all those guys, they were trading in like the fives.
Right. Right. So back to the Sam Altman quote about having an equity stake in something. At what point did that kind of feeling develop? You're working for Store. You're doing pretty sophisticated deals. Growing a portfolio from 4 billion to 10 billion. At what
Mhm.
point did you say, I want to get a little bit of the piece of the pie for myself? Did that
Yeah.
come about at pretty early in your career at Store, or maybe later on?
Yeah, I mean, I think I was very blessed to, I essentially I think it was got promoted like 5 times within a four
Yeah.
year period. Um, and as you move up the chain, typically in like a public REIT, they give you shares that vest over a period of time, and so I got a piece of the pie.
Hmm.
Granted, it's 10 billion AUM company or market cap, however you want to think about it, and so it was a small pie, but it
Hmm.
was a meaningful pie to me.
Some pie, right?
Exactly. And so that really helped me, build some wealth,
Hmm.
thankfully, and I'm very thankful for it and all the opportunities that store gave me. But then ultimately, to your point, I realized, and this was pre Sam Altman, right? But I realized that, generally speaking, your career opportunities at a big company are, they're sort of, it's interesting. I think they're generally like linear, then they get exponential, and then sort of become linear again, because you
Mhm.
have senior leadership or whoever, like you have the executive team, and are they ever going to quit? If they do, are they going to hire someone externally or promote you? You just don't know these things,
Mhm.
so a lot of it is it's very chance based, and the question is, how many years do you want to wait? and
Right.
and for me,
Right.
it was becoming difficult to wait longer and longer.
Yeah. So talk to us about those next steps. What it was like to leave, because we've got listeners, and I've talked to several people recently that are in a position where they're in a great career, but they're ready to take a leap to doing something on their own entrepreneurially. And that's a tough transition. Can you talk about that, what that transition has been like for you, and just what you've got involved with? And maybe just like advice to
Yeah.
people on how to handle that big step.
Um, yeah, I probably have a few thoughts. I think that probably the biggest piece of advice I would have is um, learn as much as you can while you're at a place, right? Um, Generally speaking, I think it's very easy to assume that you can figure things out, and many times that's true. You can call an attorney or you can call a friend or whatever, right? But while you're at a company, you sort of have a ton of things that you can learn and a lot of people that you can learn from. And I think probably 90% of the time, those chances go to waste, because you're
Mhm.
just sort of on this like um, one track mindset, right? But if you know that one day your goal is to start something on your own, I think that'll change your perspective and how you view the world and how you view your job as well.
Mhm.
Um, so I think that's one. Two, um, and I mean, hopefully I'm not being annoying, but like relationships are big, right?
Yep.
So um, I think I always encourage people to keep track of all your relationships, starting college, if not earlier, on one place. Um, and at some point, all of them will become super helpful. And sometimes a relationship that you spoke to 10 years ago, randomly on the phone, will become your capital source 10 years later.
So what does that
And
look like for you? You said you keep track of all your relationships in one place. What does that look like for you?
yeah, I literally have a Google document,
Mm.
and I'll just keep track, like first name, last name, firm, city, state, cell,
Cool.
and email. And then, I'll just keep track of notes of, when I spoke to them, what it was about, when was the last time I spoke to them. And many times, just to give you one example, I think I wrote about this in my thread. Um, I also did this with a bunch of people that rejected me. I had so many interviews during
Mhm.
undergrad, and I've kept in touch with a lot of them.
Mhm.
Many times you get sort of like a rejection email, even if it's from HR, by the way, and
Mhm.
many times you just won't respond.
Right.
I took a very different approach, and I said, "Wow, like no problem, thank you. Here's a few things that I learned. It was a pleasure." Blah blah blah. And then um, many years later, I'll reach back out because I randomly remembered some of the lessons that I learned in that interview process, or maybe I wasn't prepared for something, and like it was a meaningful lesson. And the hiring manager will be like, "What? Like you said thank you, and you remembered like that I grilled you on, I don't know, the CAPM model,
Right.
um, and that was such a meaningful event in your life. Like, yeah, I'll get coffee with you in New York. Like that's cool. Like you don't people don't do that. Um,
And
and
CAPM is what? Capital asset pricing model? Is that
yeah, I
is that
just I just picked something random. Like you'll get these like crazy questions, and in my opinion, many times dumb questions in interviews.
Right. Right.
But whatever it is, like, or you got grilled on a modeling test and you completely failed. And one path is to just, shut down and say, well, shoot, I suck, like on to the next one.
Mhm.
Another path is I suck, but like let me get better and stay in touch with this person because this person helped me realize that I suck, you
Mhm.
know? And then you reach back out and you're like, hey, um, I had like I'll tell you, I had a funny experience at some point in my life, like very, very early on. I didn't know anything about real estate. I got introduced to like one of the senior people at I think it's like $50 billion fund, um, and he brought me in. I was like super nervous. I like could barely talk probably. Still very like introverted as a person.
Mhm.
Um, and he asked me what a cap rate is, and I totally like Patrick. I butchered the thing. Like I
Mhm.
I remember looking it up, and like I kind of said it, right, I think, and then he had a follow-up question, and I just totally failed
Yeah.
miserably, to the point I think like he laughed, um, but like, but I still stay in touch with him, and
Mhm.
it's kind of like a joke now because
Yeah.
like everyone makes mistakes and you learn. And then, years later, I ended up running a $10 billion portfolio for a real estate company,
Yeah.
right? Um, so life takes you in different directions, and it's so valuable to stay in touch with people, um, because you don't know how you might be able to help them
Yeah.
um, years down the road.
Yeah. So let's circle back. Leaving store, you talked about a little bit what that's been like. What are you up to today? And how long ago did that happen when you left them? Was that
Yeah,
over a
I
year
left
now?
a little bit over a year ago, about 14 months. Today, I'm essentially splitting my time third, a third, a third. About a third of my time as consulting
Mhm.
um, across a bunch of different asset classes. I've done a pretty big engagement with one of the largest office platforms in the U.S. I've done some consulting for single tenant funds.
And what type of consulting are you doing when they bring you in? What type of work are they requesting you do?
It's really all over the place, right? I mean, some of it is investments related. In other words, like we're looking at this investment. What do you think, right? Some of it is more call it like strategy.
Mhm.
So for example, like the office REIT was thinking about going public,
Mhm.
and I helped them interact with the investment banker out of Singapore. Um, because they were just kind of speaking a language that was not so familiar. Um, and then like I have an existing contract with a software company. It really varies, but
Yeah.
it's again it's very relationships driven because you don't know what people need until you speak to them. Um, and sometimes this is the funny part is sometimes you don't even know how you can help someone yourself. You
Mhm.
get into something and you say a comment and they're like, oh, that's I've never thought about that. And you're
Mhm.
like, oh, like that seems like a pretty simple idea.
Mhm.
But it's a simple idea to me based on my experience at another company. And I'm coming into here, a little cold turkey, let's say, on what office is, right?
Mhm.
And how it functions. But you learn about it and you learn enough. And then, new people bring interesting ideas, right? So
Yeah.
that's kind of like where I spend a third of my time. Um, then another third is looking for transactions myself. Some of that is single tenant at lease. I've been kind of picking up on that in the past 2 months as cap rates have, I don't want to call stabilized, but got better.
Mhm.
Before, like things just didn't make any sense. But I've also looked at, I looked at a vacant office building recently, a mixed use building.
What's your take on vacant
Um,
offices?
oh gosh, I mean, it's funny. If you would have asked me this 3 weeks ago, I would have said don't touch them.
Right.
But a few weeks ago, you know, a local sponsor in Phoenix went under contract on something, and he told me about it, which is actually the third is I help with capital introductions. Um, so he asked me for potential some help to fundraise the money, and Patrick, I mean, the deal is ridiculous. Um, I think office is so illiquid at this point
Mhm.
that there are some opportunities that, I mean, you can screw up five different ways and still make money.
Mhm.
So to be candid, like I didn't look much into it.
Yeah.
Um, but now I'm starting to.
Mhm. Yeah. Interesting. And you mentioned prior to our recording or me pressing record, you've got your own rentals too. So can you talk a little bit about that? What that's been like, and if you have a strategy further on down the road that you want to continue to expand that portfolio?
Yeah, I have two rentals in Phoenix. I don't, I don't know. I don't know if I have a strategy for rental specifically,
Mhm.
I sort of think about I in many ways I like fell into them. Like we lived in those houses or planned to renovate them, and then something didn't work out, and we moved, and I just decided not to sell,
Mhm.
because it's a decent like passive income play.
Yeah.
Although sometimes it's not so passive as most real estate
Right.
investments. So I would just, whenever a broker tells you that something is passive income, you should
Right.
not believe them.
Mhm.
um, but I think I think more than anything, playing in the residential market um, expanded my mind.
Mhm.
In the same way that store expanded my mind to the possibilities. I mean, it's crazy to see the company acquire $2 billion of transactions,
Mhm.
right? It's also really mind expanding to buy something on your own.
Mhm.
You know, um, I personally find it very mind expanding. I don't. By the way, I don't even know if that's a phrase, but I'm using it
I think
anyway.
it is. I like it.
So like, I look at some local businesses to buy nowadays, and it's a very fascinating exercise. Like hypothetically, could I close on a business? Sure. You know,
Mhm.
I just don't know what to buy yet,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But as things come up on the market, I look at it. I look at different real estate opportunities, and to me, it's always a question of, um, I never knew. My wife always talks to me about this. She's like, why don't you just get a job? Like, why are you like, why are you so hesitant? Just
Uh-huh.
just go be an accountant, whatever,
Right. Right.
Um, and I could never really explain myself until that Sam Altman quote that
Yeah.
I literally sent it to her yesterday. I was like, this is perfect. This literally explains what I'm hesitant about. It's like I don't want any opportunity. Like I really want something
Yeah.
that I can be at for many years, and it will make the rest of my career seem like a footnote.
Mhm.
So it's a big question of where should you spend your time, and where the return on that time will be the best.
Right. I love it. And what was the phrase? Mind expanding? Well, I forget the
Yeah.
phrase you used.
I totally just I don't know. I think that's
Yeah.
English.
Yeah.
I
No,
didn't know
that's good.
English when I was 11, so I didn't know English when I was 11, and one of my only B's in college was English. So I can officially say sometimes I'll say like, is that English? I don't know.
It's funny. It's funny stuff. I wanted to get into a quick fire round if you're up for it. We've got
Yeah,
about
I don't know what that means, but let's go.
okay, let's do it. No, it's just a kind of a rapid fire questions and you can just kind of give me your quick thoughts on things here. So I wanted to hear about like any your favorite real estate books, anything that's made a big impression on you.
Um, to be honest, it's not real estate books.
Yeah.
I personally I like learning just by doing. I
Yeah.
have a hard time reading like long form books.
Uh-huh.
But non real estate books, I think probably the two that were most impactful for me is there's one called Deep Work by Cal Newport. Um,
I just did a Twitter thread on that yesterday.
no way. Okay,
Yeah.
I think I've given probably 50 of those as gifts.
Yeah.
Um,
It's a great book.
and and then the second one is Never Split the Difference, which is
Uh-huh.
it's a negotiations book.
Yeah.
Both have definitely changed my life.
Never split the difference. That what's that guy's name? Chris Voss, is that right?
Voss, yes, that's
Voss.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's a good one. That actually comes up a fair amount in people mentioning it as a book that to check out. So
yeah, it's very good.
yeah, we mentioned Twitter quite a bit. Who do you feel is putting out great content on real estate Twitter?
Oh man, so many people. Um,
Or your top
I'm
two or
I'm
three
I'm
follows?
afraid to even mention people because who am I gonna forget? I don't know. Look, I mean, like I really enjoy some of the things that Stripong puts out. Moses Kagan is very good. I especially like Moses Kagan's um I guess you could say personality.
Hmm.
Like his tweets just feel like very down to earth. It's not very corporate-y, you know.
Yeah. Right.
It's very friendly, and I've had some conversations with him too, and like he's just phenomenal.
Yeah.
Some other folks that I've connected with, um, that are just very impressive. I'm trying to remember their anonymous names. I think he's like EB something. He changes his name like every other day.
Did you end up going to that New York event that was it Strip Mall guy
Super
put
Bowl
on?
guy. I well somehow got an invitation. I was very touched, and I actually booked a ticket. And
Mhm.
then like always, one of my kids got sick.
Something. Okay.
And then my wife, put down the hammer.
Right. It looked like a
So
great
I ended
event.
up not going. Yeah,
Yeah.
it looked really fun. I mean, I was so excited for it. Hopefully, I can come to the next one.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, I want to hear a little bit about like your number one inspiration. Is that your kids, your wife, your parents? Who's your number one inspiration?
Um, I think pre having children, I could probably name a few people.
Uh-huh.
Um, Generally speaking, it's people that this is hard to find, but people that are, let's call it like in the billionaire ranks,
Mhm.
um, but are extremely humble and simple people.
Yeah.
Um, that just as a person, I appreciate that a lot, and I think it's very difficult to find. Um,
Do you have any
um,
entrepreneurial heroes like that? Do you have any names that like come to mind?
yeah, like there's a pretty substantial owner in New York, like the Sharon family,
Mhm.
Ruby Sharon. Man, he built a massive empire. Very humble person.
Mhm.
His kids are incredible people. Spend a ton of time in the community. It's amazing to see. They live in simple houses, drive simple cars. Like it's just, um, it's beautiful to see.
Yeah, I love
And
that
for
too.
me, it's very very inspiring. And um, I know like one of the top people at Goldman that also I think he like still drives like a 1990 Toyota or something like that.
Mhm.
Um, so the people like that I just really cling on to. You know,
Yeah.
um, and then I think if you were to ask me now, in a weird way, it's my kids. Meaning they can't. In a weird way, they can't inspire me professionally because they're learning their ABCs. But in another way, everything that I do is really for my wife and my kids, and
Yeah.
I look at them and they're so unassuming,
Mhm.
and they're just like, daddy, like, why do you have to go to work? And I'm like, well, that's not a bad question. Like sometimes I need to ask myself that.
Mhm.
And so kind of sometimes it just reminds me of priorities. um and that's something that was definitely difficult while I was at store, or really any company,
Yeah.
is just balancing time between family and work. And one of the big benefits to being on your own is having that be a lot more flexible.
Right. Alexey, this has been fun. I really have enjoyed getting to know you a little better. I really
Yeah, this is
appreciate your
awesome.
time. Yeah. For our listeners that want to get in touch with you or learn more about you, what's a good way for them to do that?
Yeah, I think you can probably Google my name and not find anyone else. um, I'm probably most active on Twitter now. I less active on LinkedIn, and hoping to get back on my blog as well. So, you can maybe put in my link tree link, and people can find it there, or whatever they
And
can
that's
find it at.
what's your Twitter handle is what again?
Just my last name.
Your last name.
Um,
Okay.
yeah, it's literally my last name. Yeah, I think again, if people Google my name, like all of these things will pop up.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll put all this info in the show notes, the Sam Altman, the blog post, a lot of the other things that we've talked about, deep work, never split the difference. Some good stuff that you've mentioned along here will all be in the show notes. So yeah,
Amazing.
Aleksey, thanks so much. Really appreciate the time.
Hey, thank you.
Did our first Oklahoma deal that we bought in September of 2020. We just sold last October 2022. Hit like a 60% IRR, which is insane. And then was able to 1031 that money into a property that was 30 years newer. So it's just like a win-win all around. And I had 1031 into that property, sold that property, and then deferred the gain again, and then another 1031. So I've done like, I have 2 instances now that I've done two 1031s with the same original cash.